I know. You read the title. You probably are wondering what this video is about. And it's about 2020, the year, and me looking back at it. So, after 5 years almost passing from, 2020, the big 2020 being behind us now, I want to talk about it. So, how did I feel during the big 2020? Not really anything. Honestly, I didn't feel bad, sad, lonely, none of that crap. Didn't feel anything actually. It was a normal year for the most part. I mean, I just had a lot of just staying at home the entire year. Nothing much more was done during that entire year by me. I just really just relaxed and enjoyed doing nothing. And I know that some people had it rough that year, and I know this may sound offensive, but that's not my goal. My goal is to explain to you how my experience went throughout the big 2020. And it wasn't bad per se, but the problem really is that at the time I really didn't understand the depth of what actually is happening. Now I'm more of an understanding of what happened and how it affected people, and how it wasn't just, disease. It wasn't that. Even though a couple of my distant family members did succumb to that disease, I didn't really know much about other people's experience. I knew that it was dangerous, and when these people, died, it became crystal clear to me and my family, because at the time I was living with my parents, and that is the main reason I didn't feel one of the biggest concerns during this, year. Loneliness, I didn't feel much of that because, I was living with four people, which, considering how rough the situation was back then, we really shouldn't have lived together. It was, yeah, if any one of us got sick by chance, it would have just decimated my entire home. It's gone in an instant. But thankfully, that didn't happen. And the person who, went out because of this disease made my parents actually be like, yeah, it's not just news, it's real. Like, before that, I vividly remember one of my parents saying, yeah, that's a whole lot of bullshit. But then afterwards being like, it's real, huh? That's it. So, me being much younger than I am right now, 5 years younger, and much, much less experienced, I didn't truly grasp the gravity of the situation. To me, it was just vacations because at the time I was going to school. I just enjoyed, after years of yearly studies, I really enjoyed having half a year of nothing. It was very damaging to my developing brain. I genuinely do think that 1 year defined most of my life up to till now, as it did to many other people. Like, if that didn't happen, we probably would been in a completely different timeline. Like, I couldn't tell you how much difference it would have been. But because of, the pandemic, I personally wasn't able to study as hard as I was before it, because, I didn't understand the effects that this pandemic could have had on my education. And personally, to me, that was the main concern. Like, to this day, that was and is the main effect that the pandemic had on me. To me, that was it. But now that I've, been on the interwebs a lot more and have experienced the aftermath of the pandemic and heard about people's experiences during the pandemic, I now understand how devastating that event was and how much it affected many of the people who are watching this and not just affected but is affecting and probably will affect them for most of their lives. And I think that is incredibly sad to think this one event changed so many lives and caused so many people to feel the effects of loneliness and feel the effects of depression and feel the effects of other related issues. I honestly kind of feel bad in a sense that I was so blissfully ignorant about people having such a vast difference in experiences. Because at the time, I was just incredibly bored at the end of the 6 months we had of break. Because in total, it was half a year of us just sitting at home. But afterwards, that half year ended. That entire year, we had off and on breaks that continued for a decent chunk of that year, which affected my studies very much because I just kind of stopped studying for half a year. And if you're doing that, it is going to affect you, and it's going to affect you a lot. And it affected me a lot, which caused me to completely tumble in what I cared about at the time. It took me 3 years afterwards to get to a place where I wasn't abysmal at studying. After 5 years of 2020 passing, I still feel the effects as if they were, tomorrow, because I vividly remember the entire experience of the year. It as if it happened last year. It was to me for the longest time. 2020 basically never ended, and I never quite felt the passing of time, as much as I felt it during that year. Because during that year, I was just locked at home. And when you're locked at home, you feel every second as if it's a year. And to me, it genuinely felt like hours upon hours of my life just gone. But, after 4 years, I finally truly realized that it has been 5 whole years since 2020. Like, that's a lot of time. Knowing that it has been 5 years almost feels surreal, as if it's not true. But the fact of the matter is, we're living in the big 2025. That's half a decade, right there. A decent chunk of my life that has passed since the big 2020, which I don't know what to feel about. Like, on one hand, I feel the incredible effect of that on my life, but on the other hand, I'm genuinely surprised that, whoa, these past 5 years took so long to pass by. Like, to me, all the way from 2021 and 2025 felt shorter than the single year of 2020. It just felt different, which kind of makes sense considering, the pandemic was going on in one of these years. Now, I just kind of feel weird considering that it took me 5 years to properly feel how long it had been from 2020. Like, to me, 2020 was last year. It was for the longest time the last year. And that was probably because 2021 was a repeat of 2020 for the most part. It took me way too long to truly grasp how long it had been since the big 2020. But now it's just a year to me. It's a big year, but it's just a year. I have moved on. Now don't feel like 2020 is eternally the last year. Now, I know that some people had much worse experiences than mine, and I know that it may or may not have affected you mentally, but I personally didn't have that bad of an experience the entire year because I didn't have that much responsibility on me. I didn't wasn't doing a job at the time. I wasn't, you know, facing the struggles of life at the time. I was just vibing. And to me, having half a year of nothing was great because I just didn't do anything because I didn't have to. And since I didn't have any worry related to, lifing, I just didn't worry at all. And that is possibly one of, if not the only reason didn't mind that entire year. To me, the entire incident that was COVID was just that, an incident far, far away from me that wasn't related to me at the time. I didn't really care about it. Like, ooh, it's COVID. Ooh, it's a boogeyman after to get your ass. It was like that. To me, just a boogeyman. It wasn't quite real. Even after some of my distant relatives perished, I did feel that it was significantly more real. It was, and considering that I had the longest break during that time, that was one of the few moments to throughout that entire year when I genuinely felt like this wasn't some sort of fairy tale monster, some sort of boogeyman. It was real and it was outside of my door. But to me, I really didn't mind because at the time I was living in a place which had a giant porch thing. Like it was huge. You could probably play as many games as you want there. And I did play a lot of games there and it was great because, you know, I have a brother and had a lot of fun with him because, well, as I said, I didn't feel loneliness, which most of people that I've heard from did, which I didn't feel at all because again I was living in a fairly crowded house of like four people and I didn't feel lonely for a second. Even when, it got really bad, it just didn't feel bad to me. It just felt like your average day, just a prolonged vacation. That was what it was because every time our vacations would come to an end, the Minister of Education would announce that the vacations have been extended, which I vividly remember because I was constantly happy for the vacation to be extended. I was like, yeah, it's been extended, yeah. And it didn't help that I had very little friends at the time because of the pandemic. Who would have guessed? Like most of my friends during the pandemic wouldn't come to school, which was one of the very few moments we had that I had of going to the outside, leaving the home. But outside of that, I was just like vibing, just sitting there and being me and not caring about the world going to hell, basically. I could not give a damn about that. I was just there, and I vividly remember me the day before our vacations ended, looking at our WhatsApp group, which was created for our school so that we could have education during the pandemic, which didn't work at all. But the group and just sitting there, being like, do the thing, just do the thing. Tell me that I have no reason to go tomorrow. And more often than not, the message would come in our group which would say, due to the recent events of pandemic, the vacations have been extended till dash, which was one of the best feelings. And it did not help that during that time I was miserable at school. Like to this day still feel that those were the worst year. Like a year after the pandemic, like from early 2019 to all the way to 2022, I genuinely feel that that was the lowest point in my life, mainly related to the pandemic and my grades dropping severely, which caused me to genuinely worry about failing, which here is considered a horrible thing. If your kid fails, he ain't gonna get no life. He ain't no gonna get no bitches. His life is over. that's the end. And that's a lot of pressure. Ever. I would try my darnest to not fail. So I was really, really, really upset at the time of, the situations of my studies, which were, as I said, one of my biggest concerns. I wouldn't say it was some sort of, mentally disturbing moment which changed my psyche as much, because that would be insulting to the people who actually had effects that changed how they felt about the world and which changed their experience of it. I'm not going to say it because to me, it was at the end of the day just a year. To other people, it was life changing because, some people went, got depressed and had to deal with genuine depression, which I never had to. I was just a bit, upset about the entire year. I genuinely still remember it very vividly. Me being upset at going to school. I just didn't like going to school at the time because my grades were, nosediving, and man, it was bad. But yeah, that's my experience of 2020. And in hindsight, it wasn't that big of a year. And I think it was fairly average year outside of, the pandemic. It was fairly normal. What a time to be alive. But hey, that's about it for me. Bye.